Okay. Um, our next part deals with the Cape Non-White Challenge in inverted commas. Okay. District 6, established in 1867. District 6, during the apartheid, they declared it white, and the Boer wanted to create a white settlement there for whites as a proof of the success of apartheid. And so they started, just taking out all the people's houses. That comes later on in the thesis. But it became something, the total opposite, but we'll find it out in the rest of the book. So let's look at District 6 now. District 6, established in 1867, housed many of these church mission schools. It became to be described as a horrid pest hole where prostitutes and thieves of the worst description, unquote, were found. Cape Argus and Pinnock as a reference. From arty boys to scholar gangsters, the lumpen proletariat, very low class, challenge of the street corner, armies in District 6, 1900 to 1915. Studies in the History of Cape Town, Volume 3, UCT History Department, 1980, page 132. District 6 was the place where evangelists and Muslim imams worked hard to keep a struggling community from total collapse. The Islamic faith of the Muslims allowed them to create unique areas in the Cape, District 6, Hoekap, and Salt River. The faith of the Muslims in these areas allowed them to withstand and cope with many adversities they faced. The mission schools had no impact on the faithful who were close-knit, strong, traditional Muslim communities of the Cape. So under the colonial rule, the deprivation of the masses, was part of the structure to maintain their superiority. Poor children were educated for the labor force at the Cape under poor conditions, while, quote, European colonists, as holding the paramount influence, social and political, and to see that their sons and daughters of the colonists should have at least such education as their peers in Europe enjoy, with such local modifications as will fit them to maintain their unquestioned superiority and supremacy in this land. Quote, Patterson, Color and Culture in South Africa, 1953. The poor white Dutch children who attended the mission schools as well. This soon, they attended the mission schools as well. This soon raised what they called objectionable, that white girls should be brought into daily contact with a very low type of Cape Town colored boys, quote, from Dale First Educational System Report, Commission Report, 1891. Dale also believed that mission schools were more suitable, quote, more suitable for their poor non-white children's needs. While more mission schools came into existence, there was still a large number of non-white children who could not be accommodated into these schools. Versaghi, J.H. 'n kritiese historiese studie van die ontwikkeling van die Kaapse Skiereiland en omgewing 1839 to 1915. Many children of school-going age were roaming the streets. So when you look at the masses, how they're being treated and deliberately undereducated and overcrowded and not provided with housing, Creating a culture of gangsterism for survival is part of the capitalistic structure in order to maintain the elite to be up in the upper class and use a police force to make sure that the masses are being contained and the masses will destroy themselves under such conditions. The non-white community of Cape felt aggrieved because not only did they lack schools, and that was deliberate, the formula for state aid made it impossible for those not associated with a major church to initiate the founding of schools for themselves. It saddens us to think that people could do that to other people just because of their color. The state pound for pound financial assistance excluded the poor. They were left in apathy unless an external agency other than the government was set to help them and to work with them. The, the external agency other than the government was set to work for them and to help them. The Muslims of the Cape were in a way fortunate to have the Ottoman Empire as the external agency to help their Islamic education. You see how Allah looks after the Muslims. After the Sheikh's death, the Ottoman Empire continued the support of the schools operated by the Sheikh's sons in Kimberley and Port Elizabeth, not necessarily in Cape Town. At the Cape, the Sheikh's successors left his post for greener pasture in 1894. On the corner of Whale and Bree Street School came to an end. That place at the moment now is a striptease place. Not owned obviously by Muslims anymore, but that school they turned into a striptease place. At the moment, you go down there, there's a red light there. That same school that was created, that built by the Ottoman Empire for Muslims to be educated. So the colonialists structurally made sure that they work the people out of property, out of areas to secure them the best properties and to give the masses the crumbs so that they can develop a group of people that are completely impoverished. And the schools is the system by which they do it. Make schools compulsory and provide less resources and overcrowded conditions with the same examination requirements that everybody must pass, you obviously will make sure that the masses will not be able to succeed. And only the elite will be able to take their positions. That's now pure satanic thought, still operating today. In different guises, they still do it today. All right, so, but after 5 years, it became clear that the successor had no intention of returning, and a group of Cape leaders sent a letter to the Ottoman Education Department claiming that the successor, Haji Mahmud, was not competent. They requested the Ottoman Education Department to test him in Constantinople, and if their department sees him fit, they, the local leaders, will accept their decision. Haji Mahmud was at the time in Constantinople, the 27th of September 1899. You see, the Muslims were people that they didn't lie down. They actually, wanted their way in terms of what they believe is right. And if it necessary, they petitioned the people, as small as they were. You can see the guts they had, the actual sense of faith in what they want and what they do. The growing Cape Town port needed more literate and numerative labor in a fast-changing work management relationship. Few emerged from the mission schools at higher standards. At this time, the state of Sheikh Effendi school was not suitable for the Muslims to acquire these needed new market skills required. Most youth of the disenfranchised communities in the Cape were unemployed and underemployed and living in squalid parts of the Cape. This is not the general public, not necessarily the Muslims, but the general non-white community. Public order was disturbed. Limited prospects for gainful employment resulted in offences against the public. And obviously, there were poor Muslim children as well. Not everybody managed to withstand the onslaught of the impoverishment. The majority of the Muslims were able to, but many of them also struggled. So Rowdy Malay warned the streets in gangs and used feet, stones, and knobkillings in street fights. The Lantern, 1891. English clergymen believed that more extensive proselytizing would result in gentling the masses. The rowdy Malays had to be reached. Reverend Watkins, 1887 to 1990, thought of the evening schools amongst Malay families near St. Paul's, St. Mark's, and other mission schools. So those boys from the poorer Muslim communities, they decided to actually fight in their own way a kind of a battle against the oppression by attacking um, the, the upper class in many ways, and it even happened in the modern time where some of these boys would attack and break into White Houses, etc., as their particular way of fighting against apartheid and fighting against oppression. So many of these things are happening due to structural destruction of societies. Um, English clergymen believed that more extensive proselytizing. The Reverend did lots of mission work amongst Muslim families around the mission schools. St. Paul's operated evening classes after the Education Act in 1865 allowed for evening schools in the larger cities and towns. In 1891, an education commission was appointed under Sir Murray to look at the reasons why white children's school attendance was so unsatisfactory. They were not concerned about non-white children's education. Anglican clergymen of Cape Town took exception to this exclusion. Reverend Lightfoot, because the clergy was basically serving the colored people, the colored communities, the Christian communities and the Christian churches. And the British white was just concerned about the English white community or the white community in terms of if they didn't go to school. So the Reverend Lightfoot convened a public meeting on the 14th of March 1894 to discuss the education crisis of the city's non-white people. The aim was to focus government's attention on the needs of the Cape Townians in general. Sir Dale, Superintendent General of the Education, 1892 to 1950, had to listen to the voices of the people who were, in political terms, second-class citizens. They even used those particular terms, second-class citizens. Thousands attended Reverend Lightfoot's meeting, where the Superintendent General of Education was obliged to be present. The colored citizens' agreement to approach the government to claim for their education rights as citizens and demand a higher education standard for their children than was then available. If that is possible, government should then be asked to provide other means for the education of colored people, Fasahi, quote unquote. This came at a time when there was deliberate segregation between white and non-white educational provision. What placed colored people at a grave disadvantage due to the lack of quality education was that Cecil John Rhodes had made literacy a qualification needed in business. The poor and deprived were prevented by government structures to experience upward mobility through improper schooling and denied full recognized citizenship. These are the things that they did to actually break further the ability of people to rise into position. They make laws that says you must have this kind of certificate and that kind of certificate before you can get this job. And you know the people can't read or the people don't have the education necessary. And that is how they manage to make sure that the whites will only be in those particular positions. So obviously these people's Allah speaks about their hearts are harder than a rock. Because Allah says in the Quran, even a rock can produce water, can let water seep through. But the disbeliever, his heart is harder than a rock, says Allah in the Quran. And here you see this kind of planned destruction of masses of society in order to keep control of all the resources by a few people. Right. It prevented government structures to experience upward mobility. So mission schools, with its emphasis on Christian proselytizing and limited secular skills, were reserved for non-whites. Those who completed at these mission schools were then further arbitrarily excluded from higher education. They couldn't enter university. Schools and colleges for different classes of citizens laid the foundation for legalized racism during the British rule. The Diocese College in the 19th century did not admit any colored students. It may have been through the high school fees or some distinct tacit plan. The Anglican clergymen like Lightfoot, who appealed and publicized the state, created structured disabilities. Publicized the state that created structural disabilities in education of colored children. Received a response from the local newspaper which argued they didn't like what the clergyman Lightfoot said. So quote from the newspaper, quote, "There is not one of the gentlemen that demands a complete mixture of whites and colored people in schools, who would admit a colored man and woman to his family circle upon genuine equal terms, or would regard marriage with a person of color as an ordinary family incident. A perfect separation of races socially is quite capable of existing side by side with all reasonable respect and good feeling." This is in August 15th of March 1894. It's long before apartheid started. It was articles like these in the media that gave English educational institutions political points to pursue the inclusion of English white schools. Here is proof that schools are used for political reasons. Still is. It often had nothing to do with the quality of service provision to children. It was important for the enfranchised to maintain dominance over the larger masses. The colonists equated religion, squalor, and disease with race. This attitude was often associated with deficiency of civilization, quote, unquote, of such materially deprived people. So they linked faith with poverty. So every effort was made to remove faith out of schools and educational institutions. Today, we even have a situation of now gayism being placed into the universities and the schools as part of a structure to even dislocate society even further and take them away from the remembrance of God and make it totally secularistic and sexist in many ways. So education and schooling is a major tool to drive wedges into communities and make sure that capitalism works for the few elite. So when colored people voiced their objections, they found themselves reprimanded by the Argus. Quote, it is altogether widely off the mark for colored citizens to approach government in terms of their resolution and claim equal rights as regards citizenship or demand higher education for their children than is now open to them. The difficulty, we take leave to say, has been greatly exaggerated by colored people who have taken it up is socially and not politically. 15th of March 1893. The Argus used to be the spokes, the voice of the white people, the Argus and the Times. So when I started writing for the Argus, I had and presented truth about education. I had some people from the other communities were upset about this writer who speaks about education on that level, and he's not of their particular community. So it still exists. I mean, does it? I started writing for the Argus in 2018, 2019. And I had my fans, my email fans, who disliked the fact that I had that particular position as a feature writer on Education Watch. How dare he? Okay. Muslims were also excluded from education, which was dominated by the church. The Muslims also found it necessary to have their own schools because of the Islamic faith. So this was generally the suffering of the colored people, generally, the Christian colored people through the Christian schools. The Muslims managed to find themselves in isolation from there through their madrasas and through the crafts that they taught their children. And they were not fully involved into that particular destruction. And we'll see now how things happen for Muslims later on. We now come to the section of Dr. Abdullah Abdurrahman, and I'm going to stop this particular video at 22 minutes. Because obviously with the coming of Dr. Abdurrahman's assistance of Muslims education, there's a change in things, and I'd like to get that concentration on Dr. Abdullah Abdurrahman to start on the new part, a new video, inshallah.